Good morning, everyone. So this is the first talk for the day in this room. So I'd like everyone to, I guess before I introduce the next speaker, Jorell. Jorell's from the NAB. And just a quick reminder that there's an app where you can ask questions of Jorell. So perhaps put your questions in the app. There might be time at the end as well. So anyhow, everyone would like to welcome Jorell, who's talking today about all kinds of exciting things with cyber threat intelligence. So please welcome Jorell.
Thanks, Matt. Ooh, where am I going? All right. Hi, everyone. So today, the title of the talk that I'm giving is obviously on the screen. It's looking back to the future of technical threat intelligence, and I really wanted to talk about threat intelligence and indicators of compromise, and just give you guys some practical things around the applications of threat intelligence using indicators of compromise. Now, hold on, I'm just trying to see how this thing works. Maybe not. Actually, I didn't. Maybe that's not going to work. But I'll just go through the agenda really quickly. I'm going to do a really quick introduction, and I've split this presentation up into 3 parts. Part 1, we'll look at revisiting indicators of compromise. So just defining them, looking at current applications that we know. Hold on, there's tech support here. Just giving me a hand with the clicker. And part 2, we'll look at framing IOCs through the lens of threat intelligence, and then looking to the future of IOCs and future applications, and some key takeaways questions. Now, throughout the presentation, you'll see the Back to the Future theme. So hope you enjoy some of the totes that I put and the artworks that I've used throughout the slides. Oh, it works. Yes, it works. So who am I? My name is Jorell Magtibay. I'm the manager of the cyber threat intelligence team at National Australia Bank. So been doing it for 4.5 years at the NAB. My team currently is about eight people who report up to me. And I've split my team up into 3 different focused areas of threat intelligence. One of them being tactical, technical, one of them being operational and strategic. So we output that through various stakeholders through the bank. We also are contributors to CETIS, ACSC CETIS. So we're actually the first organization to share threat intelligence back to the country, back to that ecosystem. I've also contributed to MITRE ATT&CK, and I also chair FSISAC, the APAC Threat Intelligence Committee. What that is Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and every fortnight we meet with the top 20 largest financial institutions in APAC and share threat intelligence and come up with a cyber threat level for the financial institutions for the region. Nothing small. Prior to that, I was in the Middle East building cyber capabilities in the UAE, and prior to that, I was back home in Sydney. I live in Melbourne now with my family, but was in Sydney working for financials, managed service security providers, vendors, and government. So my background is in all blue team, malware analysis, SOC, incident response, network intrusion detection, forensics, security engineering. So been doing security for the last 12 years. So kind of been in the game for a while. So let's look at part 1. Let's go revisit indicators of compromise and some of the key core applications of what most people associate indicators of compromise with. So IOCs. So what are IOCs? What are indicators of compromise? So I'll pull this, as a good citizen, netizen, you go Google, what's an indicator of compromise? So got up a mash of vendors and came up with this more concise description of indicators of compromise. It says here, an indicator of compromise is an artifact derived from digital forensics that will serve as evidence of potential intrusions on a system or network. So just from that definition alone, we can see that an IOC is actually an artifact. It's not actually threat intel, which we'll get to a little bit later. It's an artifact derived from digital forensics. And that kind of tells us, that an IOC should have some sort of context in when it was bad, where it was bad, how it was bad, and who made it bad. So that's the contextual elements through digital forensics that help define what an IOC is. So more on that later, but what we know the types of IOCs most of us associate with is domain names, IP addresses, hash values, network host artifacts, tools. Those are the things we commonly associate IOCs with from a technical perspective. And then when we look at the purpose of IOCs, we look at, it's mainly for detecting and preventing intrusions against our organizations. Agree? Awesome. So let's go to the applications of IOCs most people associate it with. So the first application is through manual hunting. So typically what you do with indicators of a compromise is you would collect it. So you get an analyst. Analysts would look at IOC sources, whether it be a list, somewhere from GitHub, a few other things. They would take that list of indicators and they would run it through the security systems and tools either to block it or look for compromise. And sometimes you'll get indicator hits, sometimes you won't. And sometimes you'll find that you've got a potential legitimate malicious actor. So now, just in the screen, I've just put APT Biff. So if you guys have watched the Back to the Future movie, you will know he's the bad guy. The funny thing is, most movies, you don't know why Biff is bad. You just know he's bad, and he's out after Marty, right? There's no context as to how he became such a tool. There's no context of his background. Maybe someone stole his ice cream and he got PTSD from it and he's just been bad. Now, unfortunately, that's what some of us think about IOCs. We just get a list and we know it's bad, but we don't know why. So let's talk about some of the key challenges of this approach. One, it's very labor intensive, right? When you do this process, you get a list. You have to process that list, make it so it's structured, you know what you're looking at, and then putting it in a tool, a system. You'll often write queries in your SIEM, and then you'll look at it through that lens. And another limitation is you can only collect so much. You can only put so much in a list manually, and it's a point-in-time search. So when you're actually doing hunting, it's from that point backwards, right? So there's nothing else that you can do about it moving forward. So you're like, all right, that's what I got. Moving on to the second most common approach is the automated detection approach. So this is kind of the approach people have tried to do to overcome some of those manual hunting challenges. And often what happens is you get a list of IOCs, IOC feeds, as much as you can find, and you're like, hey, I've got coverage across, as many indicators of compromise as I can get. Let's automate the collection and that processing into a security tool. And you do that, right? So you do that either through a threat intel platform that sends all that information to a SIEM, and you write some logic to say, hey, if we find any IOCs in our environment, it's bad, right? That's usually the logic that plays out. Now, the problems with these are when you do this, and I've done this in in our environment in the past is that you start to get too much noise. You start to see too many details because one, there's lack of context, and there's a lot of overlapping infrastructure or infrastructure reuse that happens potentially in an organization as big as ours. Now, just referencing APT, Biff and Friends, it's bad, just don't know why, and analysts really have a hard time processing all these events or alerts. Now, the challenges and issues, obviously I've mentioned it before, is there's too many events. A lot of, when you start collecting IOCs and through feeds, there could be potential for false positives. The events cause alert fatigue, which is totally opposite of what you want your analysts to basically benefit from this type of kind of architecture or flow. There's not enough context around the indicators, and there's not enough context around your own network. So let's go to part two. Let's bring in the threat intelligence lens or aspect around this whole thing. So we just wanted to define, I guess, threat intelligence with a dictionary definition while we're here. Threat intelligence is the art and science of understanding a threat. A threat actors' motives, targets, and attack behaviors. So that's really important in terms of what we need to kind of, what differentiates a technical artifact to actual threat intelligence. So how can we apply this? So let's go through an example, right? Let's say we've got an indicator of compromise that we've had to look for. It's been alerted in our environment. So let's just say it's internetline.com, right? In an ideal state, right, what you'd have with this indicator is you'd have some sort of context or evidence that says why it's bad. So luckily for us, this indicator, say if it triggered in our environment, had a report attached to it or associated with it. And that report contains the reason why it's bad and where it's bad in. It turns out that according to the report, it's related to URSNF's command and control domain, right? And as we can see in that report, it tells us where in the chain the C2 domain gets called out. So it says here, if you look at that attack flow, it's a bit blurry, but it's basically during the initial payload download of URSNF that we see this IOC. That's really great content. Now, for some of us in our organizations, potentially it could be blocked. It could be not blocked. We don't know until we start to do our investigations. Hopefully it's blocked and URSNF wasn't actually downloaded in your environment. The other thing is you don't know when this actually might have occurred. It could have occurred 30 days ago, right? It could have occurred yesterday. Hopefully, by the time if you've automated some of these processes, hopefully it's, it happened on the day that you received that indicator, but we don't know. So what do? You start to contain. You start to contain that machine that had that indicator on, that indicator fire from, that made that call out. Right? So you started from one artifact and you've expanded your understanding of the context of why it's bad. But wait a minute, in that report actually highlights more details about a possible intrusion, right? That report gives us the intelligence to say, okay, if it wasn't blocked, what else is the attacker going to do? So according to the report, oh, look, we've got the details and the intelligence that says, all right, we know that from this specific campaign, the attacker's gone and installed Cobalt Strike as a secondary payload. They've done persistence through registry keys. They've moved laterally via SMB shares. They've harvested credentials via dumping LSAS. That's really, really useful information for your incident responders to then go and start hunting for additional things within the environment. So you've just turned one IOC, one particular IOC, using the context of the threat into a full-blown investigation, and you've given your incident responders the ability and the power to prioritize exactly what to look for with that event, right? So you can do incident response. That's kind of the power of threat intelligence and combining it with an investigation and understanding where an IOC fits in within that investigation. You can do more with that. Now, I don't know if you guys have known, if any of you have used Diamond model. We use it all the time. It's actually really, really good from a CTI perspective. It allows you to expand and understand your actor, their motives, who they're after. So currently with the report, we know the current capabilities of, say, we know our starting point. Let's say we've got ersniff there, and we know that they've used Cobalt Strike within this specific intrusion to target, say, Windows 10 domain control, pivot domain controllers that get domain control credentials and pivot to a backup server. That's from what we know from that specific report. We can then take that information and intelligence and look at who the actor is. So if we know who the threat actors are using ersniff, we know there's a few initial access brokers that are using it to distribute. And we know that they are using and we know that those initial access brokers, some of them are associated with Fin6, Fin7, right? So we can start to build a broader picture of this intrusion or understanding of the threat. So once we understand Fin6, that the threat actors are potentially Fin6 and Fin7, there's a little bit more analysis involved in this in terms of probability and hypothesis building. But we can start here as a brief introduction. We start to look at, we can then pivot back and say, all right, what are the tool sets of Fin6 and Fin7? And we know they're associated tool sets, capabilities related to deploying ransomware, Ryuk, Maze, using Mimikatz, rclone for data exfiltration. And we know their motivation is financial gain, right? When you understand kind of an actor and their motives, you get to start to understand who their target industries are, who they're likely going to target. So for Fin6, Fin7, it's, I wouldn't say all industries, but a lot of industries. I just made it really easy for this presentation because I couldn't fit all the countries and target industries here, and I just said lots. Just because, financial gain actors are usually opportunistic, most of them. But when you do an analysis on this, you can start to tell the relationship between the actor and the target, right? So why would a threat target me? That's one of the other things that you can kind of use to determine a probability. So if you're doing incident response and you got ersniff, that's kind of thing that to kind of derive from or hypothesize that it could likely be Fin7 because they like to target lots of industries, and my industry could be part of that victimology. And then obviously you can start to build that relationship between the capabilities and infrastructure and derive the TTPs, right? So gain initial access using X, steal credentials using Mimikatz, move laterally, right? Using a specific tool, deploy ransomware, Ryuk or Maze, and use, say, rclone to exfiltrate data, right? You can start to build that whole understanding, and you can use that understanding to inform risk or your execs of the likelihood of the nature of what's going to actually happen if this incident were to continue on. And you can use it to do further hunting, right? There are actions and objectives. They want to deploy ransomware, so you'd go look for, you'd collect more intelligence around Ryuk or Maze or how they do that, and you'd go hunting. So what have we just done? So I'll simplify it for most people here with the IOC. So we've taken one IOC, let's just say we've gone from the data aspect. We've taken an IOC, and we've kind of boiled it down to look for attack patterns, right? So we said initial access. Now, what else are we looking for? Lateral movement. We're looking for persistence, all those kind of things. And then we've kind of gone down and looked at the threat. So who is it? Like, what are they after? What are their objectives? So we've kind of gone to this approach. It's called inductive analysis or inductive research, which begins with data and ends with a hypothesis or theory. So that's what most people do with indicators of compromise in their organization. So I've had a bit of time to actually rethink that piece. So what if we turn it around? What if we did what an alternative approach is called deductive reasoning or deductive analysis, where we begin with a hypothesis, right, and then we collect the data associated with it, right? So what this means is we start with objectives, right? We start with, what are threats that we care about are after, right? Whether it's initial access, whether it's specific other use cases. Who are the threats that we need to collect the information on, or the threat types? What are their patterns? What are attack patterns? And what are the data associated? What are the IOCs associated with those IOCs? So we kind of turned the logic around and started thinking from a threat-centric view that moves on to the data element of the IOC. So that's kind of the way we've kind of started framing our approach to IOCs. So what this gives us is a look into potential future approaches to indicators of compromise. What it does is it opens up a plethora and a whole range of different use cases or objectives that we can apply IOCs in. And I'll take you through a few examples. So if we start with the traditional one, when we look at the objective, right? So we'll look at the objective of compromise organizations for financial gain. And we'll look at the threat as ransomware as a service threat actors. I didn't specify a specific group because there's a lot of overlapping techniques, but let's just look at it in general, right? So we've got delivery via email, right? So what are the indicators of compromise we can use for delivery, right? We've got email addresses, attachments, subjects, URLs, and we can start to then make a little bit more concise decisions about how we use IOCs in the context of a threat, of an attack pattern and a threat. So exfiltrate data, same thing with IOCs, tools, file names, domains, URLs, and deploy ransomware, right? File name, file path, tools, malware. So that's really a practical way of kind of slimming down how you want to apply IOCs and where you apply it as part of either a detection or mitigation strategy, or even threat research. So the example I'll put up on the screen, I don't have any fancy kind of animations here, but just simplicity for that piece of data exfiltration, right? Exfiltrate data. We've got our threat actor, Biff, and say he uses AusCERT2023. And we know that AusCERT2023 is a executable, command line executable that you can connect to remote file storage systems via API. And we know that this has been reported on by threat actors, by many security researchers and incident responders to then basically that it's one of the most common exfiltration tools and methods in ransomware, right? Now, when you're looking at this from an IOC perspective, you're just like, look, all right, let's look at AusCERT2023. Let's one of the most practical ways is let's look for AusCERT2023 within our environment. Sometimes it's a legitimate, sometimes you may or may not legitimately use it. Most organizations will not, but you can also use file paths as part of your detection or investigation. But the other thing you could do, because most threat actors export to mega.co.nz, but there's no saying that they can't export to, say, Dropbox, Cloud, or Azure, or anything else, AWS. But who knows, if you put those indicators of compromise, in your detection logic as, your only source of information, you're going to have a lot of noise, right, as part of your organization. So what do? You correlate this, or you add some context to it. You add process execution to DNS records, and you start to look at, okay, if our clone was to connect to, mega.co.nz, we know that's definitely something that we should look into, right? Yeah? So what you've taken is, you've taken the IOC in the context of that threat, and you've made just some high fidelity detections or decisions based on the attack pattern. That's going to make your SOC or your incident responders or whoever's doing detection logic for your organization a hell of a lot easier to find what bad looks like, right? Rather than the other way around. So we've put some context in there. So that's one really, really good use case, or one really, really good use of application of indicators of compromise with this type of attack patterns. Let's look at a different one. Let's look at a different application. So let's look at, objective is to compromise, colleagues and customers for financial gain. And one of the threats that we know commonly do this is Magecart JavaScript skimmers on e-commerce websites. We know that their main objective is to steal card data via these sites. And the IOCs that we have are, that we can collect are C2 domains, URLs of where the data goes to. They're readily available. So let's look at the attack pattern of Magecart for a second. So we know that user goes to a site, and probably some of us have been done by this in our own experience, but we wouldn't know it. We make a payment on that site. And actually, before that, an attacker would go to that site, that e-commerce site, would exploit the site and implant some JavaScript there to then send that payment card information off to their own service. So back to this flow, the user would then go to that site. Many users, they would put their credit card details in and payment card information in, and unbeknownst to them, when they make that payment, that goes to the bad guy's website. And off they go with your credit card details. Now, interestingly, so let's say these are the C2 domains. Now, these are very old C2 domains. They're actually legit C2 domains for Magecart. Let's say you plug this into your proxy within your organization. Now, what you can start to see is this actually play out within your network. Because you've got the C2 domains within your proxy, you can actually see that forward traffic in. So you've got C2 domains, right? You can see that. You can see a user calling out to that C2 domain. But with the proxy, you're able to see the compromised websites. You're actually able to see the refer URLs that are sending payment card information to those C2 domains. And you're also able to see your compromised colleagues. Hopefully that's really interesting. It's really interesting. So what you can do with that information is, one, you can obviously contact the compromised site owners and say, hey guys, you guys need to look at your e-commerce sites. You need to make sure that is, you fix that up. You can tell law enforcement or the ACC, report it. But ultimately, what it's going to do is it's going to remove that exposure for everyone, not just our whoever we're defending in our organization, but for everyone else in Australia that's shopping on that site. So that's a win. And then obviously the second thing you can do is whoever your colleagues are that are impacted, or whoever your users are that you're defending, you can go tell them, hey, sir, madam, your card has been stolen by the bad guys. You should go and change your credit card details. So really creative use of IOCs that I haven't seen much done before. And then obviously, lastly, you can do containment. You can contain that C2 domain within your environment so that that detail, those details don't go in, don't go to the bad guys, or you can also contain that compromised website for, say, 30 days or whatever time frame, however long you want to do the check for, to prevent your users or organizations from shopping at that site. So that's another example. Last one, I think this is the last example. How am I doing for time? I'm going pretty quick. Is compromise of, say, customers or clients for financial gain through phishing. So when we look at it this way, we look at different attack patterns, as I think Rachel was talking about today. This is something we'll commonly see within, either in most sectors actually. Deliver via email, right? So you'll see the domains, URLs, subject lines that will get phishing delivered, targeting clients, customers. Threat actors will then steal that information. The IOCs typically used for this is URI path, file name, file path, scripts, stolen credentials, and then they'll validate those stolen credentials, or try to access the account. Some of the interesting IOCs you could use for this, and we'll talk about that, canary accounts, stolen credentials, IP address, session cookies, something that you don't usually typically see in a report. Actually, my friend Chris here is, I think, in the audience, and he can talk to you guys more about canary accounts and how they're used. But it's something that's a really interesting way to see indicators of compromise. So let's look at the attack path. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail. So our threat actor, Biff, he'll send an email, a phishing email to a user. User will then click the link or the URL, put their password credentials in, and those credentials would then go back to the threat actor, as you saw in that video earlier today. The threat actor would then go and either use a script or manually go and log in and check into a specific account, sometimes with or without 2FA, depending on how these phishing kits roll, right? And then voila, account takeover, done. So that's kind of typically what happens. Let's look at IOCs in the context of this attack. So firstly, phishing domains and URLs, let's just say it's someone spoofing your organization, or it's a bad site, right? And the courses of action you can do around there are, take site takedowns, blocking the sites, your usual containment strategies. The second thing in this phase of the attack that your additional IOCs that you can gather, or you can actually create, is by using a canary account. So what you can actually do is seed that phishing site with a legitimate looking account that's actually owned by you guys. Technically, it's still an indicator of compromise, because you'll see later on how we use that to then identify other accounts. But you can also, if you've got a capability to look at phishing kits and look at where the accounts go, you can actually grab the stolen credentials. So it's victim at, say, blacktothefuture.org, right? So you can grab those credentials, and then what you can do is you can monitor your login activity for those stolen credentials or canary accounts. So what this gives you is an attacker's infrastructure and their session, right? So you can see when those accounts were used and where they're coming from. So this flow actually allows you to take those attacker infrastructure details and session details and pivot to look for additional victims from the same phishing campaign, right? So you just kind of created IOCs for the sake of either threat research or responding to a different type of kind of compromise or intrusion. And obviously, you're gonna contact your clients, your customers, and say, hey, you guys need to make sure, you guys need to have your passwords reset. You can protect your clients and customers in this way. You can kind of apply this logic to O365 credential phishing within your organization as well. But that's kind of the power of understanding the application of IOCs with a threat and attack pattern. Is you get to find out all these really cool applications and courses of action that aren't traditionally known. At least that's kind of what we've found out being we're leading this team for the past 4 years. It's been really, really interesting. And so I just want to go back to the start of the presentation, and I'm going to just go and I just want to redefine IOCs for the purpose of this audience, because I think we do a construction of what indicators of compromise are, but just want to expand that a little bit. So an indicator of compromise is an artifact derived from digital forensics or attack patterns. So I've kind of just added a little bit of information there that would serve us as evidence of a potential attack against a target asset, individual, or entity. Because it goes beyond just to systems or networks. You can apply this logic to multiple attack patterns, depending on the threat, depending on who they are, and depending on your organization and your mission. That's important because some people don't defend organizations, some people do security research. And IOCs can range from everything from the technical artifacts that we talked about, domain, IP, hash values, all those kind of things, to canary accounts, stolen accounts, and detecting and preventing. Like the purpose can be expanded as well, right? Now, I'm out of time, so just the key takeaway. Last couple of key takeaways is IOCs alone isn't threat intel. Understanding IOCs with threat context is. And using threat intelligence to frame application of ICs greatly increases its value to your organization and mission. So that's kind of my key takeaways.
Everyone, please, thanks, Jorell. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I do have a little gift for Jorell, though, to take back. Hopefully you're not traveling carry on.
Oh.
Not the iPad.
It's going to be interesting bringing this on a plane.
Jorell's a really friendly guy. He's here around all the conference, so please have a chat to him about CTI and how to get into it. He's really experienced and lots to share, so please thank him again.
Thanks.